Welcome back, MTG Joe here, and today we're going to do a quick one, and we are doing a meta wrap-up of day one of the Red Bull. Yes, the drink Red Bull is sponsoring a Magic tournament, and it is a big tournament. There are 1,465 participants in said tournament, and this tournament here has upwards of $20,000 in prizes. It's a free-to-enter tournament on MTG Melee. It's a multi-day tournament. So we're going to be recapping what's happened in day one, and I went through and pulled out some cool deck lists, as you can see in the tabs at the top, that had like either it's 8 rounds day one, so 6, 7, or 8 wins for the week. So as always with these tournaments, what we'll do is similar to the meta breakdown, kind of look to see what's been doing well. Overall representation of the tournament from both a percentage of decks played and corresponding win rates. What's really impactful and why I wanted to do this as a standalone was just the scale. For almost 1,500 players is very much akin to the large SCG tournaments or to GPs. I know when I was at GP Toronto a number of years ago, it was a limited GP and we cracked over 2,000 folks playing limited. I think that was Theros, because I opened Thoughtseize and never got to cast it because my pool was garbage. That was an O2 drop. So what we're seeing here, day one, the top lists are one player going 8-0 with mono green aggro, and then we see a number of folks going 7-0-1. Intentional draws, basically just qualifying, locking in. So we see a lot of mono green aggro at the top of the tables. And is it Dragons, Temur Treasure, which shows up a bit. It's basically a Gruul treasures list, splashing blue. Wet Gruul's kind of what it's called most of the time. That is playing counter spells. And then Mardu Fury, we're going to take a look at that deck list very shortly. And then we see just a combination of Izzet decks, mono green, mono white, a split between Dragons and Epiphany, and these treasure decks as well. So that's pretty much rounding up what we see in the top of the leaderboard, the top 25. But really what I want to jump to is the deck distribution and corresponding win rates. So we had 1,465, just shy of 1,500 players. Mono green made up approximately 17.5% of that, and 215 decks, and including mirror matches, which is always important because mirror matches will always kind of normalize around 50%. Someone's got to win, someone's got to lose. So even in that, they still managed to go 603 wins, 509 losses, 54, almost 55% win rate for mono green aggro. So continually seeing that this is a top deck at the tournament. This is one of the top decks in the format. You need to be accounted for. Most red-based decks are playing 4 burning hands, and it's still seeing a 54% win rate. The Izzet decks, Dragons and Epiphanies, made up 17 and 13% respectively. We've seen a shift. A lot of the decks were going Epiphany the last couple of weeks. Now they've went back to Dragons, in part because of Worlds last week, most likely. Both of the decks have a sub 50% win rate. This week we see 47 for the Dragons and 49 for Izzet Epiphany. My understanding is the Dragons deck is weaker to mono green, where the Epiphany deck was more of a control deck, had a little bit more answers. So seeing probably more of a closer matchup there. We're seeing mono white aggro as the third most played decks at 158, 12%, almost 13% of the meta. This one is another deck that has a positive win rate. And then we drop off quite significantly from triple digits down to 55 decks with Temur Treasure. Treasure deck did have a positive win rate, 55.47 to 55.5. The Treasure deck, what it's doing is putting a proactive game plan while having counterspell backup. So you can put pressure against the Izzet decks while having interaction. I found personally, I played it in the standard challenge, a variation, a little bit more creature focused with like the werewolves and stuff like that. Not as much on the top end. I played some Wrens as well, but the mono green matchup could be a little bit tricky because they tend to just scale you up a little bit bigger and their removal is a little bit more efficient. Dimir control continues to suck at these tournaments. Dimir's a color, people love playing it. I'm a sucker for Dimir, but I don't think it's had a positive win rate at any of these tournaments thus far. We're also seeing mono black aggro. This is mostly, I would assume, Ehrlich's list, the pro player. He posted about a list I was doing well on the ladder with. See Gruul Aggro, which is basically just the Team or Treasure deck. Most likely, it could be Werewolves as well, sub 50%. Grixis Epiphany, just hanging around that 50% win rate. We see Mono Black Control, which is typically the Blood on the Snow decks. Showing a decent win rate, 57, 52. Decent sample size, plays pretty well against Mono Green. And then we just kind of go down. Azorius, which was doing okay in some tournaments, and at least in best of one has a pretty high win rate, 36%. Grixis Control, 38%. Azorius Tempo, not heavily represented, but 61% of the meta, pretty well. Jund Treasures, which we'll take a look at some lists, 65%. And then going down, these are just pretty low. What's Bant Festival doing terrible. Esper Control doing terrible. Orzhov Tempo. Okay, gotta check out what that list is. So jumping into some decks that look pretty sweet. We have this Mardu Fury deck. This one went 7-0-1, so unbeaten through the tournament. And what it's trying to do is you have like Gold Spans, Graveyard Trespasser. So it's like a Rakdos aggro deck that's playing some copies of Showdown of the Skald, and then you target your own stuff with Shinjiri Shelter for Gold Span to make more treasure, make it larger with all the counters that you're putting on it thanks to Showdown of the Skalds, and then you fling it with Kazul's Fury at your opponent's face. Interesting deck. You have Burning Hands, Meat Hook in the side, gets you some copies of Redain, Angel Fire Ignition. This is a fun of card in the sideboard. So that's a really interesting list that we're seeing come through. The Jund Treasure list that we mentioned. It's basically the core of the red-green aggro deck. A lot of these Jund, Teamer, stuff like that is red-green, splash of third color, thanks to Magda, Jaspera Sentinel, Goldspan treasure package. This one's playing Immerstorm Predator, which is a very good card right now. Gets around a lot of the removal, pseudo-indestructible. Still playing your Rangers class, still playing your Escus Chariot. This one does give you some answers in Infernal Grasp. You have Check for Traps to attack the hand. So not playing counter spells, but playing discard. So discard doesn't work as well when you foretell something like Alrund's Epiphany, but you can try to attack their hand earlier, get rid of removal. Interesting, this list is playing Light Up the Night. No Planeswalkers in the main, so you can't flash it back. But with all the extra mana you generate, it's just a big fireball to the face. Sideboard, we're just seeing Power Word Kill, some Kessick Naturalists, I guess for ramp aggro, Reckless Stormseekers, just when you want to transform into more of an aggro deck, and then just some more answers in that deck. We have Simic Aggro that went 7-1. This one's an interesting one. It's kind of a mashup between Mono Green with like your Old Growth Trolls, Kazandus, Werewolf Pack Leaders, but you're also ramping with Root Coil, Creeper, you have Wren's, Decisive Denial, so Counterspell or Fight Spell. And then it's just kind of your package. So you have your counter spells on the side. Devouring Tendrils is just a way to deal damage. Mind Flayers for the creature millers to steal your opponent's cards. So interesting take. I've seen some Simic aggro lists, which are just called Simic aggro, which is basically let's take the mono green list and add counter spells and make the mana worse. Be interested to see how this one plays. Like there's a lot of tap lands. You're playing Rimewood Falls and the Snarls as well. Is there a payoff for Snow? Yeah, Blizzard Sprawl. So you're also probably less likely and less consistent in terms of getting your Blizzard Brawl to actually be indestructible. Because in this list here, you're playing 7, 8 non-snow lands, where in the other list, you're usually playing anywhere between 0 to 2, from what I see. It's usually just a layer of the Hydra. Speaking of Simic Ramp 611. So this is kind of the go big versions, like the Cyclone Summoner deck that we see sometimes in Best of One, with the Cycloners in the side. You're ramping up, you're playing into Ren, Chariot, Alrund's Epiphany, you got some tempo plays, Ilmarith as just a big beater and dragon, your Malavant Hermits as interaction. So interesting deck. You can switch against creature decks to play Cyclone Summoner. You have the counter spells as well with the learn package with like your teachings, mascots, stuff like that. And then finally, Sultai Control, Sultai Midrange. This is a 6-2 list. They lost to Epiphany and the Mardu Fury deck in the last few rounds. So they're unbeaten for the first few. This one was interesting because you have like Nighthawk Scavenger, Tovalar's Huntmaster, like Werewolf Titan, and then Lier. So it's an interesting mix of creatures in this list that kind of caught my eye while I was interested in it. You have Binding, Culling Ritual for like the aggro decks that ramps you, Duress, Behold the Multiverse, instead of Memory Deluge for some copies, some negates, and then you just have like 8 cheap interaction spells. Power Word Kill's an interesting one. It sucks against the Dragons deck, obviously, so it's interesting to see these copies come in here. It's really much a dead card in that matchup, but we see here what they beat. So yeah, like I guess the only Dragon deck they ran into, they lost to both, at least to one of them with the Goldspan Dragons. Sideboard, you have stuff like Shadow's Verdict, Graveyard Keeper, Siphon Insight for the control matchups, stuff of that nature. So yeah, that is kind of the standout decks for day 1. Wanted to highlight this. I'll summarize day 2 as part of the weekly meta update, but if you enjoy this type of content, these weekly meta snaps, knowing what's good, what's kind of the evolving meta of standard, with the weekly ones I also touch base on historic if there's enough data for each week. Be interesting to see once we get post-ban memory lapse data. So stay tuned. You can always hit that subscribe button. It's free and easy way to keep in touch. And if you do enjoy this video, as always, if you can, drop a like and comment. It's a free way to help support the channel. Anyways, thanks for watching. Have a great one and stay safe out there.